Hey guys, my name's Xander and I'm recording today from my office. But imagine for a moment my office, this building, this entire valley being under hundreds of feet of water. That's how it used to be here. A lake the size and depth of Lake Michigan used to cover this entire area all the way up to the Idaho border and to the Nevada border. And it was known as Lake Bonneville. About 17,000 years ago, it reached its peak, in some places being 1,000 feet deep. Salt Lake City would have been completely underwater. And today, a lot of people around Utah hike the Bonneville Shoreline Trail, a trail along the mountains that comes off and on from about Spanish Fork, Utah, all the way up to Idaho. And this trail would have been the ancient shoreline of Lake Bonneville. Many people don't know that everything under them at that point would have been underwater. The story of Lake Bonneville is epic, full of chaos and giant animals and huge destruction. So we're gonna dive into the history in this video. But how was Lake Bonneville first discovered or recognized in modern times? It was about in the 1830s when Captain Benjamin Bonneville mapped the Great Salt Lake and started laying kind of the groundwork to all of this. Then in about 1849, Howard Stansbury started recognizing the shoreline sand benches that people hike today and started piecing together this idea. He once stood on the Bonneville salt flats and he said that there must have been here at some former period a vast inland sea. Then in the 1870s, Grove Carl Gilbert explored the area, started piecing together all this information and mapping all these shorelines, and came up with what we know today as the Bonneville Lake, named after Captain Benjamin Bonneville, who first started laying the groundwork. But how was this ancient Lake Bonneville formed? The first thing to keep in mind is that Utah and Nevada and areas are part of what we call the Great Basin. A basin is basically kind of like a dip in the earth where water comes into and can't get out unless it overflows. Utah is part of the Great Basin, meaning it's so huge, any rivers and waters that flow into it, they have no outlet to the ocean. So all the water that just kind of gathers here and forms lakes like the Great Salt Lake and Utah Lake. And if it doesn't go into a lake, it'll either evaporate or it'll either get just lost in the ground. The second thing to keep in mind is about 55,000 years ago, there was some volcanic activity up in along the Utah and Idaho border. And this activity shifted the flow of the Bear River. The Bear River used to flow into the Snake River and out into the ocean, but it diverted the Bear River down into the Great Basin, into the Great Salt Lake, which is where it flows today. But the Bear River wasn't enough to fill Lake Bonneville. So the third thing to keep in mind is that it was a lot cooler back then. The mountains would have been full of ice, full of glaciers, and this would have all added to the water being pushed into the Great Basin. But the glaciers would not have been enough water to fill up Lake Bonneville. So a fourth reason is that the cooler climate just caused the water to stay here, not evaporate. It also caused more precipitation, more rain, and the Great Lake Bonneville slowly started to rise. So several different factors led to the formation of the Great Lake Bonneville. But to give you a sense of how big the ancient Lake Bonneville was, about 17,000 years ago, it reached its peak and was about 20,000 square miles. So just picture Lake Michigan looking out into the lake and just endless water. It would have swallowed up the Great Salt Lake, Utah Lake, Sevier Lake, extending to the Idaho border and all the way to the Nevada border. All the little mountains that we see west of the Great Salt Lake would have been these little island monuments just kind of peeking out in this vast ocean. Lake Bonneville was so heavy that it actually pushed down the Earth's crust about 250 feet. And we know this because we look at the shoreline around the Great Salt Lake, and then we look at the shoreline around Idaho, and we can see a 250 feet difference for how heavy the lake was. So one of the wildest, most powerful things about Lake Bonneville would have been these ocean-sized waves just crashing into the mountains, but moving around sand and sediment throughout the valley. For example, in Utah, anyone who drives from Salt Lake to Provo area, from Salt Lake Valley to Utah Valley, they'll pass what we call the point of the mountain. It's this popular geological feature that everyone recognizes as they're driving along the freeway. The point of the mountain was created by these waves that would push sand around and create these kind of like huge sandbars. If you look at the point of the mountain from a bird's eye view, you can clearly see different shorelines at the point of the mountain. Another feature is close to Tooele. It's called the Stockton Bar, and it looks like this man-made dam. But really, it was this underwater sandbar where the waves would push sand off of the mountain and then deposit it there in the valley. So anytime you're driving around Utah Valley or Salt Lake Valley, just look for all these sand deposits that this ancient lake would have moved things. Today, there's a lot of people just mining all this sand, which is kind of crazy to think that they're doing this because of this ancient lake that used to be here. One neat way to visualize the ancient Lake Bonneville that was here in Utah is to think of Scandinavian fjords. Those are these huge, giant canyons, usually around Norway, that cruise ships take you through, and you get this really epic scenery. That's pretty similar to how it would have been in some places here in Utah, because the lake would have been so high, it would have been weaving in and out of these canyons that are close to us. Not only that, but in a lot of these canyons, there would have been glaciers just going down them and pushing things down. And then just imagine parts of these glaciers breaking off and little icebergs floating around the ancient Lake Bonneville. It would have been a really neat sight to see. But the ancient Lake Bonneville wasn't just about water. It would have been teeming with life. A huge, massive trout and other fish would have been swimming its depths. You would have had these wetlands out to the west with birds and giant weeds and stuff. Along the mountains, you would have had these frozen alpine ridges. It would have been very different than the desert that we see today in Utah. And it would have been dangerous. There would have been a lot of huge, crazy animals here. The giant sloth, the mammoth, wolves, the saber-toothed cat. It would have been a really crazy place. We don't know if humans ever witnessed Lake Bonneville. Humans came into the Americas, they think, around 13,000 years ago, and that would have been when the lake was descending. So maybe they saw some of it. We don't know. We just haven't found the archaeological evidence to support that. So it's still a mystery to today. And if you ever go out into the deserts, keep an eye out for little artifacts that might help show whether this happened or not. But how did this great ancient Lake Bonneville disappear? Well, at its peak, it started getting so high that close to the Utah-Idaho border at a place called Red Rock Pass, the water came up above the ridge, out of the Great Basin, and down. And this rim was full of loose gravel. And once things started happening, it just burst open in almost, they say, in literally a day. In literally a day or a week, a huge flood started emptying out into the Snake River. And just imagine the contents of Lake Michigan just emptying out They used to think it was maybe as big as the Missouri River, how big this flood was, but it was actually bigger than that, 5 times the size of the Amazon River, just gushing out in a matter of weeks or months and destroying everything in its paths, moving huge 30-foot boulders, and you can go there and now see them deposited in different areas, smoothing rocks and the landscapes, tearing apart the landscape. So in some areas, farmers can't even farm at all because all the soil has just been ripped out. It would have widened canyons. It would have just taken down any animals in its path and put them out into the ocean. So it would have been really massive, known as the Bonneville flood. And just within a matter of weeks or months, Lake Bonneville went 400 feet lower to what we now call the Provo shoreline. And if you're ever driving around Utah, you can clearly see in different areas the Bonneville shoreline and the Provo shoreline. And that's the difference of how big this flood was. So if you're ever out driving around Utah or hiking along the Bonneville Shoreline Trail, just think of how all this valley used to be under 1,000 feet of water. Picture Utah not as it is now, but as it used to be. It's pretty amazing to think about. Thanks for watching. I want to do a lot more videos like this, not just about geology, but Native Americans, like the Fremont culture, because I'm half Native American myself, history between Europeans and Native Americans, different massacres that happened. If you subscribe, then you're going to help me be able to produce these videos. And I also want to do documentaries where we go out to these locations and see it in the real world. I want to save all this history before it's lost to time, before it's lost to construction, before it's lost to the digital world where we're all just on our phones all the time. I want to get people outside and to learn about this sacred land and sacred history. So hit subscribe and help me with that. Thanks.